The pounding on the outside of the ark would not stop. Fists, nails, the screams of people he had known his entire life. And Noah, inside, with his hand pressed against the wood, understood for the first time what it truly meant that God himself had shut the door. The rain had started 3 hours ago. Not a storm, something else, something the earth had never seen before. Water falling from a sky that had never wept, rising from fountains that had never opened. And outside that single sealed door were the voices of neighbors, cousins, old friends, mothers with children in their arms, all begging to be let in. His hand did not move from the wood. It could not. If you have ever obeyed God when everyone around you called you a fool, write "I stood alone" in the comments below. This is the story of Noah. Long before the flood, before the ark, before the first plank of gopher wood was ever cut, the world had become something God no longer recognized as his own. The earth was full of violence. The imagination of men's hearts, the scripture says, was only evil continually. Every thought, every plan, every waking hour. Cities had risen where music once played to false gods, and the streets ran with the blood of the weak. Giants walked among men. The sons of God had mingled with the daughters of men, and the offspring were monsters of pride and hunger. Fathers no longer taught their children the name of the Creator. Grandfathers laughed when the old stories of Eden were told, as if speaking of a fairy tale meant for babies. And in the middle of that world lived one man, just one. Noah walked with quiet steps. His beard was long and streaked with the first threads of white, though his hands were still strong from years of work under the sun. His eyes were the color of river stones, patient, watchful, tired. He had a wife who had stayed beside him through every insult, and 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, who had learned to pray in a world that no longer knew how. He was not a warrior. He was not a king. He was not a prophet who thundered in the marketplace. He was a farmer, a quiet man, a man who, in the middle of a generation drowning in its own darkness, simply refused to let go of the name of God. And then, one day, the voice came. Noah was outside near the edge of his fields when he heard it. Not thunder, not wind, a voice that spoke inside his chest and outside his ears at the same time. And what the voice said made his knees fold slowly into the dust. The end of all flesh had come before God. The earth was going to be destroyed by water, and Noah alone, was going to build a vessel large enough to save his family and every kind of living creature that breathed on the land. He was to build it here, on dry ground, nowhere near the sea, 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high, 3 decks, 1 door, 1 window, and it would take him 100 years. He knelt there for a long time. When he finally stood up and walked back to his house, his wife saw his face and did not ask what had happened. She only put down the bread she was kneading and waited. That night, by the low light of an oil lamp, Noah told his family everything. Shem listened with his hands folded. Ham looked at the floor. Japheth looked at his father as if searching his face for signs of a fever, and the wife of Noah, whose name the scriptures never wrote down, but whose faith carried a household through a century of ridicule, reached across the table and placed her hand on top of her husband's. She said only one thing. Whatever God had told him, they would do it together. The next morning, Noah walked out to the field with an axe. The first tree he felled took him 3 days. He was not a shipbuilder. He had never seen a ship. There were no shipyards in his region, no drawings, no masters to teach him. There was only the voice in his chest telling him the measurements again, and again, and again, whenever he forgot. Word spread through the surrounding villages faster than the wind. The old man was building something. A house? No, too big. A barn? No, wrong shape. And when someone finally understood what Noah was actually building, a boat on dry ground, days of walking from any sea, the laughter began. They came from miles around just to see it. Children were brought by their parents to point and giggle. Merchants stopped their caravans and shouted mocking questions. Women whispered from the wells, and the priests of the false gods sent messengers to warn Noah that his madness was disturbing the peace of the region. Noah did not answer them. He kept cutting. He kept measuring. He kept teaching his sons how to shape a beam and set a rib and seal a joint with pitch. And each night, before sleep, he told them again what God had said, that the water was coming, that the door would be shut, that mercy had a shape now, and its shape was this vessel of wood. Years passed, then decades. Noah's beard turned fully white. His sons grew into men and married. His shoulders bent, but never enough to stop him from lifting another plank. The mockery of the crowds dulled into something worse than mockery: indifference. He became a joke that no one bothered to tell anymore. Just the old fool at the edge of the fields, building his impossible ship for a flood that was never going to come. And still, every morning, Noah rose before the sun. And still, every morning, he picked up the tools. Have you ever obeyed something you knew was true, while the whole world around you insisted it was foolish? Then you already know a small piece of what Noah lived for 100 years. The ark took shape slowly, over generations. The frame first, rising from the ground like the ribs of some enormous beast asleep on its side. Then the outer planks. Then the inner chambers, hundreds of them, each one designed for a creature Noah had not yet seen. Then the pitch, sealing every seam, inside and out, until the wood shone dark and heavy under the sun. And then, one afternoon, when Noah was almost 600 years old, the voice came again. The time had come. He was to gather his family and to bring into the ark every kind of animal, 7 pairs of the clean and 2 pairs of the unclean, and food for all of them. In 7 days, God would send the rain. 7 days. Noah walked out to the ark that evening and stood beside it in silence. The vessel was finished. The pitch was dry. The door stood open, wide and dark, waiting. And for the first time in 100 years, Noah did not know what to feel. The animals began to arrive the next morning. They came in pairs from every direction, walking through the fields as if guided by a shepherd no one could see. Lions walked beside deer without touching them. Wolves passed lambs and did not turn their heads. Great cattle lumbered up the ramp beside small rodents that scurried under their hooves. Birds descended in clouds from the sky and settled on every beam and rafter of the upper deck. The villagers came to watch this too. And this time, they did not laugh. Something in the way the animals moved unsettled them. Something in the silence of the birds. But even then, even standing there, watching the impossible happen with their own eyes, they did not repent. They did not ask Noah to let them in. They shook their heads, muttered about witchcraft, and went back to their homes. On the seventh day, Noah walked up the ramp with his wife, his 3 sons, and his 3 daughters-in-law. 8 people. 8 out of an entire world. He stood at the threshold and looked back one last time. The fields where he had worked. The sky above them, still blue. The distant smoke of a village where children were playing games he could hear faintly on the wind. And then he turned and stepped inside. And the door of the ark, which no human hand had touched, swung slowly shut behind him. And with a sound like the ceiling of a tomb, it locked. For a long moment, there was only silence inside, the rustling of feathers, the breath of the great animals, the distant heartbeat of Noah's own family around him. And then, in the distance, the first drop fell. At first, the rain sounded almost gentle. A tapping on the roof, a whisper on the wood. Noah's grandchildren pressed their faces to the small window and watched the sky darken. The village outside carried on with its business. Some people pointed at the clouds and shrugged. Others ran to bring in their laundry. But the rain did not stop. By the second hour, it was falling in sheets. By the third, in walls. And then from beneath the earth itself came a sound no living soul had ever heard. The fountains of the deep breaking open, water erupting upward from cracks in the ground, rivers reversing their flow, the sea rising to meet the sky. The villagers began to run. They ran first to their houses. Then, when the water reached their doors, they ran to the higher ground. Then, when the higher ground was swallowed, they ran to the ark. That was when the pounding began. They came in the hundreds, the thousands. Men who had mocked Noah for a century. Women who had told their children he was a lunatic. Priests who had cursed him. Children who had thrown stones. All of them now beating with bloody fists on the outside of the door. "Let us in! Let us in! Let us in!" Inside the ark, Noah stood with his hand pressed against the wood. He could hear voices he recognized, a cousin, an old friend from his youth, a woman whose child he had once carried on his shoulders at a wedding. He could hear a boy crying for his mother. And he could not open the door, because God had shut it. Not Noah, God. Mercy had a shape, and the time to enter it had ended. His wife stood behind him. She did not speak. She only placed her hand on his shoulder, and together they stood there, listening to the sound of a world dying on the other side of a wall of wood. The pounding lasted a long time, and then slowly it began to quiet. Not because the people had gone away, but because the water had come up to meet them. The screams became fewer and fewer, and then, at last, silence. The ark lifted. Noah felt it before he understood it. A shifting under his feet, a gentle rocking, and then slowly, the great vessel that had rested on dry ground for 100 years rose from the earth and began to float. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain fell. The waters covered the mountains. Every living thing that breathed on the land was gone. And the ark drifted on the face of a world that no longer existed. Inside, life continued. Noah's family cared for the animals. They rationed the food. They prayed together each morning and each evening. The children learned to sleep to the sound of rain that never seemed to end. And Noah, sometimes when the others were asleep, would place his hand on the wood of the door again and stand there in silence. He was not thinking of the mockers. He was thinking of the ones he had loved. After many months, the rain stopped. The waters began to recede. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Noah sent out a raven, which did not return. He sent out a dove, which came back with an olive leaf in its beak. And when at last the earth was dry, God spoke again and told Noah to come out. Noah stepped out of the ark into a world washed clean. He built an altar. He offered a sacrifice, and God set a bow in the clouds, a rainbow, as a promise that never again would the earth be destroyed by water. Noah lived 350 more years after the flood. He planted a vineyard. He raised his grandchildren. He watched the earth slowly fill again with life. But every time it rained, even a soft rain, he remembered. Now let me ask you something. Because Noah's story is not really about a boat. It is about a man who obeyed God when no one else did, who kept working when everyone laughed, who built the impossible for 100 years alone in a world that told him every single day that he was wasting his life. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever known God was asking you to do something that made no sense to anyone around you? Have you ever kept praying, kept working, kept believing, while the people you loved shook their heads and pitied you? Then you are already walking Noah's road. The world will always tell you it is too much, too long, too foolish, too late. But the rain always comes eventually. And when it does, the only ones left standing are those who obeyed while the sky was still blue. Noah did not save the world. He could not. The door was not his to open or close, but he saved everyone God had placed inside his house. And sometimes that is exactly what obedience looks like. Not saving everyone, just being faithful with the ones you were given. If this story moved you today, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who is quietly building something that no one around them understands. Because the Ark of Noah still speaks. It says that God sees the one faithful man in a generation of 10,000. It says that obedience today is preparation for a storm tomorrow, and it says that the door of mercy, once opened, will one day be closed. So here is my question for you, and I want you to think about it before you answer. What has God been asking you to build that everyone around you keeps telling you to abandon?